Okay, everybody, here we are. We're going to talk about running records and anecdotal notes today. And as we've said all along, is that this course is about informal assessment. And so taking anecdotal notes and running records is a primary way in which we do informal assessment. They also call that observation. Everything with informal assessment is usually tied into observation. So that's what we're going to look at today, specifically doing running records and anecdotal notes. These will be part of the portfolio system, and so we want to get really good at that. We're going to do some practicing along the way too. Let's start by looking at some terms that we're going to be using. We talked about authentic assessment before. But it's a term that's used interchangeably with informal assessment. It's also sometimes called play-based assessment or performance assessment. And early childhood educators believe these authentic types of assessment provide a more accurate and culturally meaningful portrayal of a child's learning. So it's assessment that's based on a performance in the classroom rather than a standardized test, authentic assessment. Another term that we are going to be looking at quite a bit throughout the semester is observation. And observation is a systematic means of gathering information about children while you're watching them, while you're observing them. And we do that every day when we're in the classroom and working with children. We are observing them. But taking observational records is something that we do in addition to just observing. And observational records are written records of the observations of a child. And there's lots of different ways you can record your observations. And today we're going to be talking about anecdotal notes and running records as two ways to record your observations of children. Anecdotal notes is one way, and that is a brief note of the events in a particular child's day. And the key is that these are brief. And then the running record is not brief. It's a continuous set of notes where you're writing everything down that happens during a time of day that is with a child or a group of children. And we use these two methods for different reasons, and we'll get into that a little bit deeper a little later in our talk today. So there are some advantages and disadvantages to these observational informal types of assessment. I think that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, so let's talk about some of those. First, for informal observational assessment, teachers can get a more holistic picture of a child, which will help them understand all aspects of that child's development over time. Informal assessment is ongoing, and so you're going to be able to see a child's growth and development and the progress that a child is making over the course of time. So that's the first advantage. A second advantage is that informal assessments can help teachers know what children are ready to learn and what their interests are. And they can develop curriculum based on those assessments that are individualized for that group of children in the classroom. So for example, if I have observed that a child, Marcus, is very interested in animals, then I can be sure to have books on hand about animals that will encourage his literacy development. And so that's one way that I might use my observational knowledge about Marcus to improve his learning. A third way is that informal assessments can also be derived from your curriculum objectives. So not only can informal assessments help you develop curriculum, but you can develop informal assessments based on your curriculum objectives for the week. So Maybe one week your curriculum objectives is for children to, and I'm putting in quotes here, demonstrate an understanding of numbers and counting. Maybe that's a standard that you really want to look at. So given that that's what you want to look at this week, you might set up a math game that uses dice with the dots from the numbers 1 through 6. And while the children are playing that game, you take assessment notes on where each child is in relation to that objective. Do children understand how to count the dots? Do they understand that dots represent a number? And etc. There's all kinds of things that you can look at when your children are playing math games. So a fourth advantage is that informal assessments are really conducive to that constructivist approach, which we know is a theory that we use quite a bit in early childhood. If you remember Vygotsky and Piaget, those are the two theorists that talked about constructivism. And informal assessments really are based on the understanding that children construct their own knowledge, and they're active learners who need many, many different ways to show us what they know and understand. And so because of this, informal assessment can promote documentation of higher levels of thinking, such as problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. So because you're observing children and taking notes while children play, you're going to see a much higher level of play and learning during those times. Another advantage is that informal assessment is very flexible. There are many different ways to conduct informal assessments, which we'll be learning about this term. And today we're going to learn about anecdotal notes and running records. But we'll also be learning about checklists and rating scales and interviews and sampling and more. Another way that informal assessments have an advantage over other kinds of assessment is that it will gather richer data than more traditional methods. You can't really anticipate everything that you might observe. So informal assessment allows you to capture unexpected events or understandings based on the children's activities or things that happen during the day. And these can give you some really unique insights into children's thinking. For example, I did a project once where a worm was found on the playground. And so you might discover through this that children want to know about worms. And you figure out, what do they know about worms now? You find out if they're afraid of worms or if they have any misconceptions about the environment a worm lives in. And those kind of observations will allow you to develop some experiences for children about worms so that they can gain a better understanding of this creature that lives in their world. One important disadvantage to informal assessment is that it can be very subjective or biased. It's just one person's interpretation. And for this reason, it's key to talk to others about specific behaviors a child might be having that is being assessed and evaluated, because different people are going to have different perspectives about different behaviors. I hope that makes sense. For example, if you're using a checklist, everyone in the classroom and the program must be clear on how to interpret every item on the checklist. And so if you're looking at counting, are you looking at counting from 1 to 5? Are you looking at counting from 1 to 6? Are you looking at rote counting where children just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Or are you looking at children pointing to items and objects and counting those objects 1 through 5? So you have to know what you're looking for and not try to be very objective in your data collection. Another disadvantage of informal assessment is that the observer or the environment might affect the behavior of the children. So whenever possible, the observer should be someone that the children are familiar with. and in a setting that they're comfortable with, which is typically, for teachers, it's the home during a home visitation or the classroom. So that's why we really are careful about how we observe children and the type of environment that they're in, because it can quickly influence the assessment that we're gathering, data that we're gathering. Informal assessments are all about observations, and these types of assessments are ongoing. You'll, as a teacher, you will conduct informal observational assessments every day and every week throughout the year. So let's start with another more definition about observation. Observation is a process in which a teacher systematically observes and records information about the child's level of development and our knowledge, skills, and attitudes in order to make a determination about what has been learned and to improve teaching and support the child's progress. So remember, there are those three parts to observation. The first being, taking your actual observation notes. The second part being interpreting those notes. And then remember, the third part is about how you're going to use those notes. Are they going to inform your curriculum? Are you going to talk to parents about what you observed, etc.? And some goals of observations can be one, to understand children's behavior, to evaluate child's development, and to evaluate the learning process of children. And then also, as we've talked about before, is to understand what to plan next in your curriculum based on what the children in your classroom understand today. Effective observation also involves recording children's behavior at the time that it occurs. So you'll want to figure out your system of observation and how you're going to do that by keeping notepads around the room or Post-its in your pocket, or thinking of different ways that you're going to be able to collect that information as it occurs throughout the day. Observation, many believe that to be the most valid form of assessment for young children. So you can see why it is so very important. One of the absolutely most important things about observation is to be objective. You want to just record the facts during that first step of observation where you're recording. You don't want to be subjective. You don't want what you report to be influenced by your own thoughts or views about a situation. You just want to record absolutely the facts of what is happening and include detail about what is happening. You should also realize that even though we're trying to be very objective, what we pay attention to and decide to document is even influenced by our own perceptions and experiences. Therefore, it's very hard to be purely subjective when you do observations to some degree. It's more realistic to think of objectivity and subjectivity on a continuum, and we want to learn to be as objective as is humanly possible. It's important to be aware of some of the biases that you may have. That can help you see children in a more objective light. And be aware of how your subjectivity influences your observations so that you can be more and more specific about what you see. So we're going to stop the PowerPoint for a minute and take a look at this sheet here. And we're going to try to decide if this is an objective note or a subjective note. So the first one says that Jonah is playing happily in the block center. So what do you think? Is that objective? Is it a good anecdotal note, or is it a bad anecdotal note, a subjective anecdotal note? So if you recorded that you feel that it is a bad or subjective, I would agree with you. I'm going to put subjective down here. And the key word here that tells me it's subjective is that word happily. Here, we'll highlight it. Happily is a pretty subjective word. It doesn't really tell me too much. So what else could we write instead of the word happily? So Jonah is playing in the block center. That's fine. Let's cross this word out because we don't want to use that. That's too subjective. He is smiling, so that gives us a little bit more objective terminology to use. So he's smiling and talking to Tiana about his structure. So all of that kind of tells me that he is happy, and maybe that will be one of my interpretations of this. But at this point, you know, I want to keep my anecdotal note very objective, and I just want to record the facts of what I see and what I hear. So let's look at the second one. Here we go. Sierra counts the bears on the table. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, touching each bear with her finger. Do you think that is an objective or a subjective note about observation note about a child? So what did you answer? I think that it is objective, so I'll type objective in here. So you can see that whoever wrote this note gives us good detail about what she's doing. She's counting the bears. The bears are on the table. She gives us the sequence, and what do you notice here is that this child skipped a couple of numbers when counting, pretty typical of young children, and that this child, Sierra, was touching each bear with her finger as she counted. So, sorry, my computer keys stick, so I have problems with my typing sometimes. So yeah, this is a very objective because the teacher included details about what the child was doing. So let's look at the next one. This one says Sean went to the library area with Michael. What do you think? Is this objective or subjective? Okay, so what do you think? Sean went to the library area with Michael. That's pretty objective, isn't it? So let's say it's objective. And I mean, it's an okay anecdotal note, but it doesn't really give us that much detail, does it? I would want to know much more of what happened with Sean and Michael, why they were at that library area. Did they pull out books and sit next to each other and read? Did they pick out a book together and ask the teacher to read it to them? Did they look at the pictures in a book and talk about them? I mean, this just doesn't tell me too much about, but it is objective, okay? So let's look at the next one. Sarah was very fussy today because she did not have her teddy. What do you think? Is that objective or subjective? Okay, what did you write down? What did you think it was? I kind of think this is subjective, and the word that tells me that it's subjective is this word fussy. That's a very subjective word, so let's just let's just take it out of our anecdotal note altogether. And we'll say that this is subjective. Okay. Um, how did you know she was fussy today because she didn't have her teddy? What did she tell you? What did, how did you know this? So give me more details. So what I'd like you to do right now is to practice rewriting this note by giving me more details. And yeah, you're going to have to make it up, so go ahead and do that. All right, so we'll take a look at those. Hopefully you were able to give us some detail about what exactly did happen. Was she crying about leaving her teddy at home? Did she say something? Um, was she hanging on to your leg? Was she asking for her mommy? These are the kind of details that we need to know about. Let's look at this final one together and see what you think. I'm not going to ask you to write it down this time, but hopefully you've noticed that this word enjoys is a very subjective term, so we would want to take that out. And then I would like you to try rewriting this without the word enjoys, just that Mac, and tell me how this boy Mac, how you would know that a child playing outside on the climber was enjoying it.